everybody. This is Kevin Jones, curator of the FITA Museum at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles, California. And today I am going to be talking with a very special person named Salvador Perez. And I'm just waiting for him to log in so we can begin our conversation. Salvador Perez is the current president of the Costume Designers Guild, which is an incredible organization that oversees the, let me grab Salvatore right now. Just waiting for Sal to log in. There we go. Hi, Sal.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. You know, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood.
It certainly is. Yeah, the sun is streaming in, and seems like there's not a problem in the world, does there?
Well, yeah, except that I'm in the middle of construction, so they took a break.
Oh, nice. Oh, nice, nice. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, this morning, and everywhere around the world to talk about all things fantastic costume design.
You know, it's funny. Right now, we would normally be prepping for the FITM exhibit, and it's nice to be able to, like, you know, connect with friends who I normally see there.
Exactly, and for what you just referenced, of course, is our annual celebration of costumes from TV programs. And it would have been, yes, we would have been installing it right now, and it would have been opening in about 2 weeks. But unfortunately, this year, you know, has not panned out for many people around the world. The cultural centers, the entertainment industry, just kind of all of design and creativity seems to have been affected so much. But before we begin, I want to introduce you to everybody. So I have a little bio here. All about you. Salvador Perez has designed for many TV series, including Castle, Moonlight, Veronica Mars, and 6 seasons of course, the very famous Mindy Project, where he has been nominated for the Emmy Award for Costume Design. Salvatore has also worked on movies such as Pitch Perfect, 1, 2, and 3, Think Like a Man, 1 and 2, Men of Honor, and Drumline. You were born and raised here in Southern California, or excuse me, in Central California, but you moved to Los Angeles to attend FITM, the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising. I love that we're both graduates from the great institution, and studied fashion design. Oh, you're not a graduate, but you attended.
No. Yes, yes.
Yeah. And you began first running costume workrooms and assisting on films like The Flintstones, Barbed Wire, and Titanic, which is really incredible because I've been studying the Titanic for years and years, and I'm actually working on probably a retirement book. Outside of film and television, you have also designed and developed the Movie Legends line for the J. Peterman catalogs, and designed jewelry for Bubble Bar, and designed a signature line of codes for Gilt.com. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, just before you joined us, you are the current president of the Costume Designers Guild.
Yes, I'm in my 3rd term. I will be the longest serving president, you know, continuously serving president in the union history. with
fantastic. And honestly, Sal, I cannot think of anybody better than you to head up such a great organization of people, because I have seen, I mean, I've known you now for years, and I have seen you interact with everybody, and it's always an incredibly inviting, positive way that you approach the way you handle people, and I think also that comes out that we see in your designs for your various projects.
I mean, I love the art of costume design, and I really sort of, I wanted to see I've been on the board of the Costume Designers Guild for, well, now going on 20, oh God, I hate to admit this, but over 20 years. and I joined because I wanted to see a change in the organization, and I wanted us to grow and be modern and evolve with the industry. And I realized early on that if I wanted to see that change, I needed to be part of it. So I was an active board member for 14 years before I decided to run for president. So I really understand how we worked and what we needed. And I wanted to build camaraderie amongst my peers, because as costume designers, there's one of us per show. There might be 10, 20 customers, but there's one costume designer. And I saw that when we had moments to get together, we fed off each other, and I wanted to generate more of that. So that, we bought a building, we have events. Our award show is in its 22nd year. I mean, we really celebrate costume design, and that's why I'm proud to run the organization.
It's great. And I have a whole list of questions here. Of course, we put out a call to our viewers the week before, and lots and lots of interest. Everybody was really excited to be able to meet you and talk with you, over the internet. And I'm watching any comments or questions that come in through the live stream. So if anybody has any questions that maybe we don't cover here, now would be a good time to ask. And I'm sorry if I don't get to you or it streams by too quickly. But so first of all, we're going to go back a little bit in your history. So what inspired your costume design career?
I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Reedley, California. It's a farm community outside of Fresno. There was not a lot of fashion, but I got it from reading books. And, I remember Judith Krantz novels just sort of like gave you that. She described her characters and what they were wearing down to the jewelry and the seaming of her clothes. And it really sort of sparked my interest in fashion. And I had a great high school counselor. I'm from a small farm town, and I wanted to be a fashion designer. So I had a college counselor in high school who was like, "What do you want to do?" I'm like, "I want to be a designer." She's like, "What do you do to prep for?" I'm like, "I don't know." And she's like, "Well, how about I put you in a sewing class?" And I'm like, "What? I can't take a sewing class. I'm a boy." But she introduced me to the home ec teacher, Nicole Mott Hansen, who is still a good friend to this day. And she sort of took me under her wing, and I had 4 years of high school sewing. And then my senior year in high school, FITM sent out advisors to different locales, and they sort of, I remember it was a great seminar, and there was a teacher who like draped a pattern on the mannequin. And like as she's talking to us, she pinned and draped a skirt, and I was like, I want to do that. And
that's exactly how I learned about FITM as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the universe brought them to me, and it's that, and I moved to LA to go to FITM, and it was great.
Yeah. So what is your favorite part of the costume design process? Because is it hands-on? Is it sketching? Is it research? Is it getting to know how do you do it?
Every project is different, but I think that I'm very visual, and so when you read a script, you immediately visualize the characters, and I start writing notes, and then I do mood boards, and they'll say, like, for instance, Veronica Mars, they're like, she grew in a beachside community. Her father was a well-to-do police officer, but then they're on the wrong side of the tracks, and now they're living below the poverty level, and so you start to like build that character. And like one of the unique looks of Veronica Mars was all the sort of militaristic battle gear that I had, because she was constantly being attacked, and I said, as a teenage girl, she's gonna want to have armor, and I didn't want to do it literally. But I said, if you're that girl, you're going to want to sort of build a facade to like, don't mess with me. And that whole sort of militaristic look was my idea. It wasn't written in the script. How Veronica Mars looked was completely my idea. And that's sort of they give you a line, they tell you what her mood is, and then as a costume designer, we bring it up. So I love to be able to bring a character to life visually. When a character walks on screen, you should know who she is or he is just by looking at them. And their clothes tell that story. And whether that's a dirty t-shirt and jeans or a Marie Antoinette gown, it's all costume design. And I think that so often people think that contemporary clothes isn't designed. Whether I buy it, alter it, make it, rent it, I'm putting the whole look together, and that's costume design. And that's what I love.
Yeah, that's the thing that's fascinating to me. And I do not work in this industry, and I would not be, I'm not geared or talented that way, but it's the costume for the characters and how just kind of like dead on, each of these individuals even before they speak a line, and when we are choosing the costumes for our gallery exhibitions, that's one of the things that we really look for is, how defined are those characters? Will our audience members, or our students, be able to stand in front of each of these little vignettes, and without dialogue and without scenic background, and know who these characters are? And it really comes down to the costumes.
And that's, I think, the difference between, like, people call me a stylist. I'm like, I'm not a stylist, I'm a costume designer. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a difference, is that a stylist is dressing somebody for an event, an image, as a costume designer is telling a story. I think that, yes, I do some styling because, like, I worked with Mindy Kaling for years, and, she isn't a sample size. So she, you don't get to borrow clothes unless you're a sample size. And it was like my first season on the show, and I was elected to be president of the Costume Designers Guild, and I had to give a speech at the awards. That's part of my duties. And I'm like, Mindy, would you like to come to the awards with me? She's like, great. She's like, I got to find a dress. I'm like, well, I'll make you a dress. She's like, really? I'm like, yeah. And we made her that beautiful blue aqua lace dress, and she was like, I've never had a gown fit me like this before. This is amazing. I'm like, well, we custom did a corset. It was, and my fabulous cutter fitter Savorn, who is so incredibly talented, just understood her body. And she's like, well, I'm going to the Oscars next week. Can I have a gown for that? And I'm like, sure, we'll make you another dress in 5 days. And we had that 1-2 punch of 2 fabulous gowns, and the press just ate it up. And she went from, like, loving fashion to, by the end of Mindy Project, she's a full-on style star. I mean, she's constantly on the cover of magazines. And I know that I had a big hand in that, because I just showed how fabulous she could look if you dressed her properly. And, I think it's why we get along so well, is because I can bridge that barrier between fashion and costume design.
That's one of the things I think is also really interesting, is I constantly, over and over and over, from designers, I hear not just about themselves and their work, but all the people that actually make these garments come to life. And it's like the couture industry. There really is all of these small groups of very talented, very focused individuals, from the dyers to the distressors to the cobblers to, it's the fitters and cutters. It's really amazing, this entire world that exists behind the costume designer. As you mentioned at the beginning, there's only one name, but it's all of these incredibly talented people who work for years and years and years to perfect their skills, and are often they're on the sidelines, they're in the background.
Well, and I think the thing is, it's part of a team. You're the department head, and you're only as good as your team. Like
right, 100%.
I had a great cutter fitter, Lourdes Lopez, who I met on Titanic, and she was incredible, and she was self-taught. She was an illustrator who taught costume illustration at a design school in Mexico City. And the director of the school said, we lost our pattern maker teacher, we need to find another one. She's like, well, let me see if I can learn how to do it. And she self-taught herself to be a pattern maker, and she's incredible. And I'm just like, let me see. She knew fashion because she was an illustrator, but she taught herself to be a pattern maker, and she was incredible. And she worked with me. She came, actually, after Titanic, she moved to America, and she worked with me for years, and I got her in the union. Unfortunately, she passed away from cancer, and I didn't have her. And so I had her for like 10 years. And she was my right hand because she could build everything for me. And it wasn't until I found Savorn. So, like, there were 3 years between Lourdes and Savorn. And as a costume designer, you just need that team. It's like most of my crew has been with me for years. Gayla Autumn, who's a costume supervisor, has been with me for 17 years. My Artemio Carpio, who was my assistant when I worked in fashion for Peterman, is now a full-on customer, and he works all the time. Most of my crew has been with me for years because they're all part of my team. And I think that people who love costumes and fashion, I think that most people think, well, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to be a costume or fashion designer. There's a whole other career available. You could be a costumer, you can be an ager dyer, you could be a cutter fitter, you could be a specialty. There's so many positions in the costume department. If you don't want to be the designer and take on that press and that stress, you just want to build beautiful clothes, there's an entire career that you will make a phenomenal living if you apply yourself.
So I have a question from one of our viewers, is how did you get your first costume job? And I want to blend that with one of the questions that came in earlier this week. How have you ever left a job, and why?
My first job, I was working at Aardvarks on Melrose. And every costume designer in the industry would come in and shop, and I got to know them. And then one day I was working at the shop in Venice, and Julia Sclair, who is still a friend to this day, came in with her assistant, and they were shopping, and I overheard them saying, we need, our seamstress needs a stitcher, because she can't do it on her own. She's not going to have enough time. We need to find her another stitcher. And so when she came to me, I'm like, I wasn't eavesdropping, but I'm a stitcher. And
That's okay.
she's like, great, call Jan. Jan needs help. And I worked full-time at the store from like 10 a.m. to 7. Then I drove to Jan's loft downtown. Before you had a loft downtown, it was scary. And I would work from like, 8 to like 2 or 3 in the morning, sleep a few hours and go back to my regular job. But I got to like build all these crazy clothes for movies. And then it was sort of word of mouth. Like I'm obviously I'm a much better stitcher now than I was then. Like I went to Jan, like, I can sew. And then she sat me down and she's like, oh no, honey, no, you can't. But as opposed to like letting me go, she's like, but I see you have the hand for it. I'm going to teach you how to be better. And it was a lot of take it out, do it over again, take it out, do it over again. But by the end of working with Jan, I learned so much. And just over the years, and I mean, I ran workrooms on the Flintstones and Stargate and Titanic. Ace Ventura Goes to Africa, Barbed Wire. I built costumes. And I used to do it out of my home. I just built them sort of part-time. And then Joseph Porro, I was working at a costume shop, and Joseph Porro was doing Super Mario Brothers. And he's like, do you want to come work in my workroom? And I'm like, okay. And so it was sort of like, the whole time that when I was out of FITM, I thought I was going to do a fashion line. I was doing bridal gowns and custom clothing. And I just thought that this movie stuff was a part-time job until I got my fashion line taken off. And, I remember because I remember the film that sort of sparked the idea that like, oh, somebody has to make it was Flashdance. I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking like, somebody put all of that together. Like what, I didn't know what the job was. I mean, because I was like, 13, 14 years old. And I was thinking like, somebody has to put it together. So I had an inkling of what costume design was, but I didn't, I'm from a small town. Who do you talk to about it? So it was, that sort of like, it just happened organically. Like I was stitching, somebody said, come make clothes for a movie. And then, I was actually on Titanic when one of my bridal clients produced the film Soul Food. And she's like, we're going to produce this film. Do you want to design it? I'm like, well, I'm kind of on this big $200 million movie. I'm not going to leave for your little $5 million movie. But I met the director and we hit it off. And I'm like, you know what? Let's try this out. And now 20 years later, had a great career in costume design, and I'm the president of the Costume Designers Guild. So it sort of came to me. Like I thought I was going to do, and having the opportunities like with Mindy and Guild where I can still play in fashion, but I'm still traditionally a costume designer, and that's been fun. And as far as leaving a job, I mean, yeah, I've left. I mean, like I'm a gypsy, and I kind of like the fact that I do a job for 6 months and then go to here. And I did Veronica Mars for 3 years. Well, it started the 3rd season, and then I got offered a film, and I was just kind of like, I think I'm done with Veronica Mars. Like, I don't know what to do with this. And I left, and my assistant, Jennifer Soulage, took over as a designer. And then when I was on Castle, I did 2 seasons of it. And, once it just kind of, it was a procedural show, and as much as I loved, and I set the look. Like, I set the look for Castle. And then I decided to leave. So I've left TV shows. I don't think I've ever left a film. But most of the people I work for hire me over and over again, so I haven't burned any bridges.
Well, because, I have to say, it's one thing about getting the work done. I mean, what you do is not a 9-to-5 job, and then you have your weekends off. I mean, it's the same thing in the
There's no weekends off.
Yeah,
I think I'm finally learning to have a life beyond work, because it was, for me, it was 7 days a week. I mean, Mindy Project was probably the longest job I ever had, because it didn't get old. Every season was new, and like every season had a new challenge. And I wasn't going to go back for the final season because I had a film offer. I had Rebel Wilson called me, and I had a couple of other film offers. And then Mindy called me, and she's like, I'm pregnant, and I need you. And I thought, well, how could I not take that challenge on?
You pulled out the baby card.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, it was just sort of like, I sort of thought like, well, I've done all I can. What else is there to do? And I'm like, hide a pregnancy.
Right.
And that was a challenge, because I think we started at 4 months pregnant, and she finished at 7 months pregnant, and we hit it. Like, I don't think you saw it in that final season. But it was, the job with Mindy, like I sort of took it on a lark, because I didn't know if it was like, it's about an OBGYN in New York. I'm like, I don't want to do a procedural medical show. Like, who knew that it was going to be this absolute fashion fantasy? And it's been like, I've been, have all this time off. So I've been rewatching it. And if you see season 1, we had fun. But season 1 to season 6 was a completely different show. I think much like everybody thinks of Sex and the City as this like ultimate fashion show, go back and watch the first 6 episodes of Sex and the City. It is not fabulous. Like it
No, it
took a
isn't.
while to get there.
Right, right. You know, you are to me just a textbook example of what can happen with somebody that prepares themselves, is willing to take every opportunity, no matter how obscure it may be, or something that may not even make sense, or out of a comfort zone, and to learn to do what you need to do, and you just kind of work your way from one part of the industry to another and learn everything. That's what's gonna make you a very valuable person. It's not just, I'm a costume designer.
And
Nobody ever is just one thing.
For the longest time, you were sort of stuck. You were either a TV designer or you were a feature designer. And I was very fortunate that my producers never held it. Now there's such a crossover, it doesn't matter. But 10 years ago,
Right.
you were stuck
Right.
in one category. And now there seem to be, and I think that because we used to look down on TV, like, oh, I don't do television. Well, now that I've done it, it's like, oh my God, we're doing a feature film in 2 weeks. Like when I'm doing a feature film, I have 6, 8, 10 weeks of prep. On a TV show, you have a week or two. So being a television costume designer really honed my skills. Like when I can pull off anything in a week. Like, when Mindy said, can you make me a dress in 5 days? I'm like, yeah, I've done it overnight. It's television is a great training ground, because if you can do television, you can do any feature.
Well, you just answered, honestly, the question that was next on the list is, what is it like to be a designer for TV versus film? And also, what about the difference of being in a location on a set for a TV program versus being on location somewhere for a movie, and how that differs?
Well, I mean, we're really spoiled in LA. Like, there's so many resources. We can go to any fabric store in LA, and we have, and if I want silver bugle beads, I know exactly where to get them. If I want dry cleaning overnight, LA is set up for us. You go to any other city, and it's not like that. I did, I've boasted my first job with Soul Food was in Chicago. I didn't know that city. Mm-hmm. I've always hired a local crew because I don't want to have to figure it out. When I did 4 Weddings and a Funeral in London, not only was I not in my city, I was out of the country, and there's no studio service. Like if you think of the European projects, there are these, it's Harry Potter, it's fantastical, it's built. So the stores aren't used to you buying, I had $1 million budget for those 10 episodes. So that means you're going to probably pull $2.5 million of clothes and return $1.5 million of clothes. And you still cut the million, but think of that without studio service. Like, we are so I came back from London and I went to all the studio service departments and I gave them hugs, because they really, we're so spoiled. This city is built for Hollywood. We have tailors and craftspeople and fabric stores, and it's much more difficult to work on location. Especially on a show of that caliber. Like, I remember my costume crew was like, I've never touched clothes this expensive in my life. Because normally they're like fun little comedies or, BBC projects. We were buying, couture and in mass scale, and, we had 4 weddings and a funeral. It was, I think that had I not, it took the 20 years of my career to be able to do 4 weddings, because I learned so much, and I learned on every single project. And I still, to this day, and it's gotten less now, but every new project, there's that week of panic. Like, this warehouse is empty. There are no clothes. I'm going to screw up and fail, and I'm going to be fired because I'm going to screw up. And I think that fear is good, because it drives you to do more. And I'm sort of starting to lose that week of fear. It still is probably a day or two of fear, but it's like I don't think that if I ever get to the point where I'm like, oh, I can do this with my eyes closed, then I won't be as good as I am.
So, can you bring your own crew with you, or do you have to work with crew in each of the locations? Or, because I know countries have certain rules and regulations about using.
It made no sense for me to take anybody to London, because my crew I brought wouldn't have known where anything was. Mm-hmm. And I had a phenomenal crew in London. I had Hannah Campbell, who was my assistant there, who just was a former stylist and knew the city backwards and forwards, and just took me to because we had a long prep. So she just took me to every store, every fabric store, every mall, and introduced me to the stores. And so I knew what I could get in London before I had my cast. And then I had an amazing costume supervisor, Lulu Bontemps, who, again, was a former stylist. So between the two of them, they had a great eye, and they got me a crew, because there was no union in London. So there's Beck too, but it doesn't really cover everybody. But like, I would have not had the resources to find the crew, so it made more sense to hire locally. Now, when I've done like the Pitch Perfect movies, I usually take a supervisor from LA, and then we, you know, sort of cobble together a crew. And then having done like the 2 Pitch Perfects in Baton Rouge, we knew the crew the second time. And then when we did the third one in Atlanta, a lot of the crew from Baton Rouge and Louisiana had moved to Atlanta. And then when I did my last 2 films, I'm still hiring crew from those movies. And so I will generally take a project if I know that I can get great help.
Right.
The producers don't want to take, they don't want to take crews because it's per diem, it's housing, it's flight. They don't want you to take anybody.
Do you prefer contemporary projects or historical projects, or do you care?
I like them both. I think both are a challenge, and I think they're both equal challenges. I think that if you're doing a contemporary project, you're going to have to buy and dress most people. Like, I think there's this misconception that actors bring their own clothes. No. On 4 Weddings and a Funeral, we had weddings of 400 people, and I dressed 350 of them. Because people just don't have the right clothes. Like, what their idea of a beautiful Sunday dress is not my idea of it. Or the color palette, or whatever. On a period show, well, you get to rent the background. I mean, it's rare that you get to build it all. So I think that it's a little more challenging to do contemporary, because you really, and also the thing with contemporary is that you have to make sure that it doesn't look dated. Like, you can't do trend, you have to do style, because trend, if you do a movie and it comes out a year later, like, oh, they're still wearing, you know, bomber jackets. As opposed to a period film, people aren't going to question that. I do love that costume designers are now sort of taking period films and doing a twist on them, and they're not. There was in the 70s, nobody did historical accuracy. And then in the 70s and 80s, the accuracy was right on because they got experts. And now you're seeing like Alexander Byrne or Jacqueline Duran and like tweaking period clothing. And that's the fun of it. I think if you can take the period show, make it interesting, and tweak it, then that's fun. And I would love to do something fantasy or sci-fi. I mean, Lord of the Rings, I mean, what Michelle Clapton did on Game of Thrones, like, I've been rewatching the whole season again, and I'm the whole, you know, the 8 seasons. And it's great because I know the storyline, I can pay attention to the clothes. What she pulled off every episode was phenomenal, and that would be a dream job. I mean, I don't know that I would handle it as graciously as Michelle did, but I would love that opportunity.
For a single scene, what's the largest group of people, extras, cast members, that you have had to dress?
Well, oh my God. Well, as a costumer on Titanic, those deck the boarding scenes was like 1,500 extras.
Wow.
For myself, well, I've done crowd scenes. I mean, when we did the last Pitch Perfect, we had 500 military in the background, and of course, if you're doing contemporary military, you have military advisors from like the Army, the Navy, and the Marines who are there to make sure that the lace is exactly right, that boots are the right ones, and then there's all these rules within it, like you use this desert sage for these months, but then if you've been in for 3 years, you can tell the tent. There's all these minuscule rules that only the military will know, but you want to be authentic, because if only 5% of the public knows it's wrong, it's still that 5% knows it's wrong. And there's nuances. And
they'll call you out for it too.
Oh, completely. There was a whole rule about hats. And if you're ever outdoors, you have to have a hat on. But if you're indoors, the hat has to come off. But if you're outdoors on a tarmac by a plane, you can't have a hat because it can get blown off. So there's all these like rules about it. And the finale of Pitch Perfect 3 is this. We shot it on a stage, but it was supposed to, we were going to green screen it into an open air amphitheater. And we dressed the 300 extras, and we had hats on all of them, and then got that done. And I went to get my 12 girls, and it was their finale outfit. And Anna Kendrick wanted to change her boots, and so we're like, "What? Change boots?" And I have to rhinestone them. So I'm like, extras were dressed, and I went to go. We're literally gluing rhinestones as they're like, Anna Kendrick on set, Anna Kendrick on set. We're like finishing those rhinestones, and we raced into set. She's in socks, and we put them on, and I look over, and the hats are gone. And I'm like, "Where are the hats?" And the military advisor says, "Well, we're indoors." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? This is an amphitheater." She's like, "No, we're indoors." I'm like, "Honey, we're on a stage. This is see the trees? This is a stage. We're outdoors." And she's like, "Oh, well, if the general in charge decides no headset," I'm like, "Oh my God." So every rule that you've taught me for this whole film is now broken because you made a mistake. But that's the fun stuff. Those nuances you learn as costume designers. And I'll take that to the next time I do a film. But I think, 500 is, and mind you, like I said, I've done party scenes before. 400 to 500 is a lot. I mean, unless you're doing like a stadium, like even on Drumline, we had 2,000 extras, but the stadium held 20,000. So they digitally photographed them in each section of the thing, and so we kept changing the colors of their clothes and mixing them up so that those 2,000 looked like 20,000. But that was easy because we didn't really dress them. We just sort of, wear yellow or green.
Oh, please! It sounds easy, but it's not. I mean, how exactly do you plan for something like that, where it's a group of people, and do you I don't know, have the plans for whatever the building is or the stadium, and then you literally like chart, okay, this is going to be more red, this is going to be more green, this is going to be more yellow. How exactly do you do that?
In that particular scene, each section of the stage was supposed to be fans of a particular team. So we had them bring, like, the red and gold team. So we had everybody wear red and gold. And then there was the blue and yellow team. And then we had so we just had everybody change colors for that. That was that. But I mean, like, on 4 weddings, we had the four weddings that we had to do. And the first was like a beautiful English cathedral wedding, very traditional, lots of hats. And then we had the Muslim Indian wedding, which, having worked for Mindy Kaling for 8 years, I've done a lot of Indian dress. Well, and Mindy is Hindu, and so her saris are very, but if people think of Indian as one, it's like there's 53 languages, or 53 languages, and there's so many different sects of India. So Mindy is Hindu, so her saris were short sleeve, you saw the skin, lots of skin, and then for weddings, it was a Muslim wedding, and so they don't show all the skin, everything's long sleeve, and it was those sort of nuances that you had to know the differences, and you wouldn't have all that skin showing at a Muslim wedding. And then I remember there was a young actress who played the sister of one of the actors, and she came out of makeup and she had a bindi on. I'm like, why are you wearing a bindi? And she's like, they put it on me makeup. And I'm like, because I remember I had seen some extras crying and I didn't know what was going on. And they were talking about they couldn't. And I'm like, so what? So I walked to them. I'm like, what's going on? They're like, we're Muslim and it's a sin for us to wear that because it's another religion and we don't want to be cause problem. I'm like, okay. So I went to the makeup trailer. I'm like, darling, why are there bindis on the actors? She's like, well, because they're Indian. I'm like, they're Muslim in this scene. But it's, again, that's the kind of research you do as a costume designer. And
right.
I should have passed that note on to her, so it was my fault for not passing it on to her. Because normally I buy the bindis to go with the saris, but I didn't buy them because they didn't need them. But I didn't pass that note on to hair and makeup. So it's about communication and getting everybody on the same page about what we're doing. But those are the kind of details that, as a costume designer, we're responsible for.
Well, and very quick thinking on set, obviously. There's just one fire after another before that camera, starts to roll that you've got to be aware of and be able to think on your feet quickly. And
that's why I try to, we, now with the pandemic, as we are going to have to change the way we work. Like, we can't be everywhere all the time. On 4 Weddings and a Funeral, I had 3 units going around London, so I couldn't be everywhere. But my team was amazing, and we had WhatsApp group chats, and so I would get pictures of all the extras before they went to set, and I had to be pay attention to my phone because they wouldn't let them go to set until I approved them. So I looked at the group, I'm like, okay, everybody's great. The guy in the red, he needs a new tie, but I can control that. But that's the detail I do. I bless every extra before they go to set. I bless every actor before they go to set. With Mindy, I mean, literally, we'd go in with, because she'd have like 9 outfits in a day. And it was jewelry, belt, shoes, bag. And even though it was planned out in advance, she might want to change. She might not feel the earrings that day. So I had to make sure it was there. But going into this pandemic, I know that I can still do my job, but it's going to be, virtually or, via phone. Because of my experience before, I'm bringing that experience into the new way we're going to work in the pandemic.
Are your board members at the Costume Designers Guild, are you having Zoom discussions about how it is that you're going to have to change the industry as the industry changes with digital, but also pandemics and everything else?
As the president of the Costume Designers Guild, I'm very keen on educating my members. I'm always like, we as costume designers need to be ahead of the curve, not following it, because if we're following it, we're going to get left behind. So let's learn all of this as we go forward. I think like movies like what Deborah Scott's doing on the Avatar movies, where they're doing them digitally, but somebody has to design them in the detail and they photograph them, is going to be the wave of our future. Like, there's going to be a point within our lifetime that we're not building as many costumes, we're still designing them. So we're always going to have a job as designers, but we're going to have to, as opposed to working with a cutter fitter, we're going to work with a digital artist. But as for the pandemic, well, the IA asked every local costumes, hair, makeup, grips, electric, to send 2 representatives to a committee, and for 8 weeks we pounded out the protocols, and then so that we could all be, and it was interesting to like sit down with like the grips and press and talk about what we do, because I think that, you know, especially with costumes, they have no idea. Nobody knows what we do except for costumes. Right. They don't know that I spent 8 weeks finding that fabric, having it painted, brought, you know, and all they see is it comes to set. They have no idea how it got there, and that's within my industry. So we all spoke about what we do, and it was interesting for like the camaraderie we built during this pandemic has been great, because we have a better understanding of each department. But we all got together, wrote protocols for safety, and then each, like we got together with the local 705 customers, and we helped write protocols for the costume department. Because we're the experts. Nobody can write them for us. We know how we do it. So we've written protocols. They are now, they've been getting to the governor and to the mayor. He's approved them. And now we're just waiting for the studios to agree to the details of how we implement these protocols, which is why we're not back at working yet, because there's still some questions to be answered. Like, how often do you test the actors? How often do you know, and they want to do zones. Like the costume designer and a costumer might get to a zone A, which is near the actors, but like the trailer costumer is zone B, who doesn't get to go to the set. So even there's sort of like an A group who's around the actors, a B group who's on set, and a C group who's never on the stage. So we're all learning that, and I think that we're going to start back up slowly, because we all have to learn to work in this new world, in this pandemic. It's not business as usual. We're going to have to adapt until there's a cure or until this goes away. We're going to be working this way. Right.
And it's the same thing with the in my industry with the museum world. You know, we present finalized products, you know, exhibitions or a catalog or whatever, to the public and our students, and for me, my administration. And you know, nobody understands all of the work and the hours and hours that go behind it, and the different, you know, techniques that are required. You have your very specialized techniques that work only for the costume industry. It's not fashion. You're not at all part of the fashion industry. Just like, you know, we dress historical garments in very, very specific ways that are never harmed and have to use certain kinds of materials and so forth. It's not like dressing at a department store. So, you know, it's interesting how this aspect of dealing with the body and how it's dressed has all of these crossovers, because we're trying to figure out now, how do we open our galleries again? It's like opening, how do you open studios again? It's just really, everything is up in the air and changing, it seems like every 5 minutes, but it's also allowing us to be very creative in our thinking. And I'm so happy to hear the things that you've just talked about.
Well, I think that's the thing, is that we have to, and as we were writing the protocols, we knew that as we were writing them, because it was a months-long process, that things were going to change. And like, there was a whole question about like, can it stay on fabric? And like, you know, if somebody tries on a dress, we have to do it afterwards. And so, you know, the protocols were very strict. And now they're like, look, there's the doctor, the head of infectious disease for UCLA Medical Center was our advisor. And he's like, I have not heard of anybody catching the disease from a garment. Like, it's just not, I mean, it doesn't live on fabric. So there was this sort of like, we were having all these protocols and plastic bags, like, none of that's needed. It's really about wearing a mask, washing your hands, and like not even wearing gloves. Like, I mean, like every time I go to like Costco and I see, and they're like and they're touching my groceries with those gloved hands, and I'm like, can you please not touch my groceries? Just wand them. I'll put them in the cart. Don't touch them, because those gloves have touched everything that's come through here. So now I'm contaminated by every single person that's been in. It's just being smart. And I think that, you know, if we all behaved, and if we all wore masks, and if we all just washed our hands some more, this could stop. And I think we can go back to work. We can have a museum exhibit. We just need to all behave. But I've also spent 140 hours talking about it. Most people haven't. They've done a couple of online researches, and so I feel much more different about it.
So I have a question from one of our viewers. It's, how do you communicate these protocols that we were just talking about to independent creators and non-guild productions?
Oh, well, they're not secret. We published them. I suppose I can post them on our website. It's not secret. I will talk to my board and see if we can just publish them on our website. We have a research page, so we'll put them on the research. You know what? They might be on the research page. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, great. That's good. So what are your upcoming projects? What are you working on right now, or what are you hoping to work on when we can all kind of get back together?
Well, I was on a film called Vacation Friends with John Cena and Lil Rel Howery, who when we shot, it was a shooting in Atlanta. We shot 2 weeks on location in Puerto Rico, and then ironically, the day we were done in Puerto Rico was the day that everything shut down. So we were flying back from Puerto Rico, and as the president of the Costume Designers Guild, I had gotten like 10 calls about shows being shut down. So I went to my producer at the airport. I'm like, are we gonna get shut down? He's like, stop being negative. I'm like, 15 shows have shut down, like 10 today. He's like, we're fine. And then like literally 20 minutes later, he's like, we just shut us down. So we flew back to Atlanta. We had the clothes come in from Puerto Rico. Like, well, we have to unbox them. So he's like, we'll work Monday. He's like, but you're going to be down for 2 weeks. Go home, take a break, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks. Of course, that was 5 months ago.
Right.
We've gotten calls that we're supposed to be going back any day now, but of course, the protocols haven't been agreed upon. So I think that everybody's sort of like prepping, and some people are like designing from home, anticipating the protocols be cleared so that we can all go back to work. So I could theoretically be going back to Vacation Friends. And then Mindy called me because the second season of Never Have I Ever has been picked up, and they want to start, soon-ish. So those things are going. I've been doing a little mask collection because, I'm idle hands of the devil's playground. So, and I have tons of rhinestones. So I've been making these sparkly masks, and that's been fun. And running the guild. I mean, the guild has kept me busier than ever because there's just so much going on, and we're trying to we're just trying to keep it going. And I spend a lot of time on Zoom meetings. Like, I didn't even know it existed, and now it's like, oh, I have another Zoom meeting. I have another one after this.
Yeah, the Zoom world, it's incredible. I never knew what the word Zoom meant except, going real fast before all
right.
going down. So, okay, this is a general question. Christina and I are asked all the time, how is it that you became a curator? How is it that you got into the industry? What's your background? So this is, what advice would you give to aspiring costume designers?
I think that I think everybody wants to be a PA or an intern. It's like that's low pay. It's like long hours for no money. I think if you want to get into business, learn a craft. Be a stitcher. Be an ager dyer. Do something that you can make a living at. It's like, do you want to come in and be a PA and make minimum wage, or do you want to be a stitcher and make $40 an hour? And here's the thing: is like we were talking about all these craftspeople. Those craftspeople are dying off. I mean, when I got into business 20 years ago, all of the studios had these amazing tailors and seamstresses and cutter fitters who've been in business for 30 and 40 years. Well, they've all retired off. And the new generation of talent is not doing it because everybody's going to school to be a costume designer or an illustrator, but nobody is coming in to be a costumer or a cutter fitter or a cobbler. I mean, if you have an affinity for this, you might not want to do it the rest of your life, but I started as a stitcher. And I went from stitcher to workroom supervisor to assistant costume designer to designer. I worked my way through the business. I always made great money. I never suffered. Well, I mean, you do suffer because it doesn't work sometimes. But my point being is that since I had a way to make money, I didn't suffer through the industry. I was never a PA. I mean, I started as a stitcher and I worked my way up that way. Learn a craft. Hone your skills in college, especially now with this pandemic. Hone your skills, because if you can come in and say, I can stitch, I can dye, I can paint, I can do whatever, there's going to be opportunities for you to get into the business and make connections, because it's not just about getting in the business, but you have to know people. And it was all those years that I worked as a stitcher that when I started to work as a cutter fitter and run workrooms, I knew people, I knew designers, I knew supervisors. So you want to build connections so that you have a career going forward. So it's really about getting to know people. And so putting yourself in a situation where you get to know them, whether it's working in retail, especially in LA, there's working in retail, you get to meet so many costume designers because we're all over town. Working at a fabric store or learning to stitch and getting a job at a shop, because there's constantly need for, and it's hard to get in the union, but it's easier to get in the union if you have a craft.
How about digital? Because we were talking about earlier that the digital world within the movie industry and in television is really becoming more and more important. How important might it be to become a specialist in rendering textiles digitally?
You just hit the nail on the head. Our illustrators used to come to work with a box of pencils and markers, and now they have their Wacom tablets and their computer screens. The digital art is the way we're going forward. And some of our illustrators, like Philip Boutet and Zion Tan, who are doing ZBrush and Maya, and they're able to literally do a rendering. And it's so technical now that they can draw like the armor and then from that illustration, they could take it and have it sculpted in a 3D printer. I mean, that it really is the wave of the future. And so if you're, I mean, I think a lot of our new illustrators are coming to us with the digital degrees as opposed to fine art.
We talk about the hybrid world now, you know, especially with schools. You think of FIDM because we're so much digital, and we're going to be going hybrid with our classes later with very strict protocols. And you know, it's interesting because you have those craft people who, and it takes sometimes years to really learn and to hone these hand-on tactile abilities, and at the same time the digital world. You know, we really, it seems to have entered into a hybrid era for so many different industries.
And especially with digital illustrations, what I have found is, like, I've met a great illustrator from SCAD in Atlanta who was she wanted to be a children's book illustrator, and she did some beautiful illustrations for me, but she had no knowledge of fashion. So I'm like, well, the princess seam is wrong there, or you need to do the arms eye has to be bigger, and she was like, what's that? Because she could make a beautiful picture, but she didn't know the fashion terminology. So right. I think that if you know, if you want to be a costume illustrator or work in the digital world, you're going to have to have a broad knowledge of costumes, because it's not just, you're not just drawing the picture, but like, how is it built together? Like, where do the seams go? What's the proportion?
How does it move?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So this is collection conversation. So it surrounds the FIDM Museum collection, and I know you have seen our collections many times, and we appreciate the compliments that you have given to us personally about the incredible rich archives that we have to draw from. I did, since you just talked a little bit earlier about Never Have I Ever, and especially the scenes with the saris that you use. And I pulled out some photos, detail shots, that I just want to show our visitors of some of the incredible saris that we have in the FIDM Museum collection. And it's something that we have exhibited some of these before, but not a lot. And I thought, you know, we need to pull out these incredibly rich, magnificent textiles that are, you know, up to, you know, 13 feet in length, that wrap all sorts of different ways around the body. One thing that I thought was really fun is that the aspect that ties all of these together that I'm showing is that beautiful gold patterning. So can you talk just a little bit, just you know, a couple of minutes, about your use of the saris specifically for that episode?
Well, Never Have I Ever, the family was Tamil Indian, which is a little different than traditional Hindu Indian. And Maitreyi's mother, Kiruthia, when we were looking for a sari, she's like, well, she's under 16, and you don't wear a traditional sari because you're a young lady. You wear a half sari. And I'm like, what's a half sari? Because I had, you know, I knew about Hindu saris and I knew about Muslim saris, but I didn't know this term. And she's like, well, it's the same sari, but as opposed to wrapping it, which I can wrap a sari better than most Indian women, because most Indian women don't know how to do them because they have somebody do it on them. And it's funny to me, like, we did 300 people at a scene from Mindy Project, and we had 200 Indian ladies, and I would say of the 200, maybe 20 could wrap a sari, because it's not something they do themselves. Their aunties, their moms, their grandmothers, a neighbor wraps them. They don't learn it. It's not passed on that way. So I knew how to wrap a sari, and I'm really good at it. But this taught me no. She's like, no, you take the sari, and because they're young girls and they don't, you know, because wrapping a sari, I use a ton of safety pins to keep it in place. Indian women don't. They usually leave one. They're like, young girls move around so much, so they take the sari, and it's actually a sari. A traditional sari is 6 yards. It's 6 yards of fabric. The first 2 yards are the body part of it that you're going to see, and the other 6 yards are wrapped inside. So the last 2 yards are the most heavily embroidered. You take the sari and you cut it and you make it into a pleated skirt, and so it's a pleated skirt, the top, and then you, as opposed to wrapping it, you have a scarf that goes around. So I actually, because I'm lavish and I had the money to do it, because she's like, well, it's always hard because there's never enough fabric because you only want the 2 yards of the beautiful stuff. So you try to make that be the benefit. I'm like, well, I'm just going to buy 2 saris. She's like, what? I'm like, well, yeah, I'm going to buy 2 saris. She's like, but that's so expensive. And I'm like, it's a TV show. And I actually use 3 saris because and mind you, rarely will you find 2 identical saris, because the whole point is that no 2 women want to look alike. So unless you custom make them, you're not going to ever find 2 saris the same. I
Right.
found two saris, same colorway, so the aqua and gold, in two different stores, and then one had another version of it because I used one for the skirt, I used one for the blouse, and then I used part of the wrap from the second one to do the wrap, but then I wanted fringe, and the two saris that I used didn't have the fringe, but the third one had the fringe, so I cut the fringe off of the third one. And we made this and even Karuthi was like, this is literally the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'm like, thank you. But, you know, she taught, she had a sample of the one that she had made for her daughter when she went to a party, and we took it, and of course she did the Loving Hands at Home version, and I had the Sivorn Price beautiful couture version of it, which is great because, you know, the sari, you know, normally you wear it and you put it away, you never see it again. We shot this for 3 days in a sweaty school in the valley, and then we had 2 more days of shooting on stage. And so luckily it was built so beautifully. But there's the details of a sari, and one of the little secrets that people don't know is that a lot of the gowns for Titanic were made out of saris, which is my first introduction to them. Deborah Scott bought saris, and we cut them up to make those gowns.
Wow, that's amazing.
So that was my introduction to saris, going on a shopping trip with Deborah.
What a perfect example, Sal, of, you know what, anything you learn, it doesn't matter how obscure it is, somehow in some part of your life, it will come back to you and be really valuable.
And it's funny because there was actually, I was working on Goosebumps 2 in Atlanta 2 summers ago, and the Biltmore Mansion in Nashville, North Carolina, had an exhibit of the Titanic costumes. Right. And I always wanted to see the Biltmore Mansion because I'm a huge, you know, historical buff. And so I called them up and I'm like, hey, I was manufacturing foreman on Titanic and I'm in Atlanta. I'd love to come see it. They're like, what? Come, please. You know, we'll give you a private tour. And we drove up there 3 hours to get there, and I met the museum curator, and it was beautiful to see all these old friends that I had worked on 20 years ago in this beautiful setting of this like home that was the right era. Like the clothes were in 1913 and the home was 1913, so like it was 1912. So it was just perfect to have them in that home. And she's like, we were so impressed with the beading. How did you get all this beading? And I'm like, those are made out of saris. She's like, and then one of the other curators from the museum, she's like, oh my God. She's like, I've been trying to figure out how you got that beading. I'm like, they were Indian saris cut out.
Well, and our mount maker, Carolyn Jamerson, who does all the hair in our galleries, she did the hair for that Titanic installation.
I remember that because I remember thinking like, wow, this looks very much like the Fifth exhibit. She's like, oh, one of the, so it's a small world. Don't piss anybody off.
It is. We all call on each other all the time. You know, so we only have a few minutes left, and this has just been so interesting, Sal. Thank you so much. And you expressed interest and delight in our collection of Betsy Bloomingdale's croquis, the sketches. I know this is going to show up backwards, but this is high style. The catalog that Christina and I did now, golly, 11 years ago, which includes, you know, garments that she donated to us. She was actually the first donor to the FITA Museum back in 1977 before we became a nonprofit in 78. Oh, wow. And it was phenomenal because she saved all the croquis that Dior, you know, would send to her each season so she could pick out the clothes that she wanted to have created. And she was a very, very organized kind of pack rat for fashion. Yeah. And we have more than 800 original sketches with their fabric swatches that she gave to us. And according to Dior Archive, it is the largest collection known of the Boan for Dior couture.
Wow. I mean, I remember like, the last time I was there was a time when they were open a wall, and I'm just like, just the historical aspect of that, like that's somebody, because nobody saved those. I'm sure most people threw them out. So God bless it, she saved those. And like I said, I'm sure Dior verified that, you know, nobody else has that. Wow.
Right. Exactly. And it's also interesting because you can see the original sketch versus how the dress was that she ended up with, and how she had things personalized. It's never exactly, a sketch. Everything gets tweaked in the couture. Similarly to.
That's why I like hand sort of watercolor illustrations, because now with these new digital ones that are so specific, I want a little mystery. I want the opportunity, like as I'm sewing this garment, if I want to change something, that's why I like a nuance of an illustration as opposed to a rendered, because then I'm stuck with that. Okay, now I can have blue trim because I wanted to use red trim, but I put blue in the illustration. So.
Well, one of the things that's interesting that you bring that up, because Betsy said the exact same thing. she loved receiving the croquis. I mean, she absolutely loved them. She would go through them first, pulling out all the ones that she didn't like. She would then get together with her husband, Alfred, in their living room and lay all of the croquis out together and choose what her wardrobe was going to be for that next season. Okay, but she had already pulled out the things that she didn't like, so he would never choose something she didn't like. However, if she chose something that he didn't like, he's like, you know, fine, if you want to go and have that made, but just never wear it around me. So that was their little, you know, the little team effort they had going on there. But yeah, she told me that she loved receiving the croquis. And then it was when Gianfranco Ferré took over Dior Couture that the company changed from the croquis to sending videotapes. And we have all the videotapes. She saved those as well and donated them. Wow. She never enjoyed choosing her wardrobe from the videotapes the way she enjoyed it from the rendered drawings.
I mean, there's just something magical about a costume illustration. And so even though now, like most of my illustrators that work for me do it digitally, I always request that the digital technique they use looks hand painted. So Asha Ramdeen does it beautifully. Gina Monica Flanagan does that beautifully. And that's the thing, is that you can look at Asha Ramdeen's illustrations for Mindy, and it's funny because I know that most costume designers want every illustration to be a different pose. And the entire 6 seasons that Asha illustrated for me on the Mindy Project, it was the exact same croquis, because I wanted to be able to have a paper doll where it's a click, 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 and if you look at our illustration, she uses the same pose and the same body the entire 6 seasons.
Nice.
And I love that. It was my, you know, like, she's like, it's so easy to work for you, because it's like, I don't have to like change, you know, like people want 10 illustrations. I'm like, no, I wanted to have a paper doll.
Well, Sal, this has been tremendous. Can you believe the hour is already past us?
I'm shocked.
Seriously, I know. And I've had so many comments that have been floating up that says, I could listen to you for hours. And I have to agree with them, Sal. You are a very giving, open, lovely person. I feel privileged getting to know you, and through our connection with the museum and costume design, and both having gone to FITM. So I just want to thank you, you know, tremendously for taking the time out of your schedule and your home improvement to come and talk with us today.
It's been my pleasure. I miss you guys. I hope that we get to, you know, I hope that we're back to normal for the film exhibit next year. If not, maybe we'll have a virtual tour. I mean, look, we're trying to figure out how we have the Costume Designers Guild Awards. We, you know, it might be a virtual award show. We don't know.
Well, this is when creativity kicks in. And I feel very privileged, and I know you do too, to work in very creative industries and amongst all sorts of creative people. So thank you again, and to everybody who tuned in. We're going to say good afternoon from Los Angeles, and join us again in a couple of weeks when Christina and I are talking about the next behind-the-scenes aspect of the FITM Museum. Thanks so much. Wear your mask. Wear your mask. Wear your masks. Bye-bye. Bye.